Ukraine on air. We welcome you from the very heart of the Europe. From Ukraine, this is our UA English broadcast. Today is the 25th day of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Here is Nick Starkov, good evening. And we are starting traditionally from the on-screen graphic that shows you the overall total calculation of Russian army losses here. Here you see that as of today, there is already 14,700 military personnel left here in Ukraine. Then tank units, 476, armored combat vehicles, 1,487, artillery systems, 230 units, multiple rocket launchers, 74 units, anti-aircraft warfare systems, 44 units, 96 aircrafts and over 100 helicopters, almost 1,000 vehicles, different automobile vehicles, ships and other types of boats. It's 3 units, 60 fuel tanks, 21 drones, and 12 units of other special equipment. And here also traditionally note that this calculation is provided by the Armed Forces of Ukraine and the General Staff, and it's verified. At the same time, the calculation is constantly updating, and it's quite complicated due to the ongoing hostilities. And now, here is our first material for you. Today is again 25th day of Russian invasion, and Russian shelling of Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and houses is continuing. Destroyed homes all over Ukraine. And here is the story prepared by my colleagues, and more details you'll see right now.
Devastation, fires and increasing shelling. The last night, Kharkiv was again targeted by Russian strikes. As a result of shelling, 5 civilians were killed, a 9-year-old boy among them. As a result of heavy shelling, fires broke out in the northern areas of Saltivka and Velika Danilivka residential areas. Eyewitnesses report that shells hit apartment buildings. And these ruins are what's left of Izium, a small town in the Kharkiv region. There was not a single piece of military equipment, only the houses of civilians. 1 person was killed by a Russian air attack. Meanwhile, a humanitarian crisis is reported in the city of Chernihiv. There is no power, heat and water supply. The infrastructure has been destroyed and the humanitarian corridors failed. Today the city was shelled and bombed over again. In the towns of Rubizhne and Severodonetsk, 3 people were killed by the Russian shelling. 24 houses were damaged, 23 residential areas have been left without gas supply, and 26 report failure of power supply. In Mariupol, an art school came under fire with about 400 people in a bomb shelter. The building was bombed out. People remain under the rubble. The number of victims remains unknown. Russian telegram channels inform that the Russian heavy flamethrower system Solntsepek, which fires thermobaric high-explosive projectiles, has been used in Ukraine. Fighting and shelling continue in Kyiv region. Russian soldiers constantly hit social infrastructure and residential areas. The Ukrainian armed forces bravely and heroically repel Russian soldiers' attempt to advance. Also, the Ukrainian armed forces have got a new trophy, Russia's man-portable air defense missile system Strela. Reported by Pavlo Shtelmach, UATV News.
And we're welcoming here in our studio our first guest. This is the defense and security expert in Ukrainian Institute for the Future, as well as the Baltic Security Foundation, Glenn Grant. My greetings to you, Mr. Glenn.
Yeah, good afternoon, sorry.
Good afternoon. We have some minor issues with the audio, so I really hope that my guest is hearing me now.
I can hear you.
That's great. Now I hear you. Well, today we know there are some grim news from Belarus today coming. We know that military equipment, there are some signals that actually show that Belarus is on the either is considering or already decided to enter this war. So you see on screen the military convoy of equipment that is heading to Brest, not far from the Polish border. Also, according to the advisor to the Interior Minister Vadim Denisenko, Belarusian troops are already approaching the border. So the question is, the first question is how you assess the perspectives of Belarusian army entering this war in Ukraine.
Well, I'm quite clear that the soldiers that come from Belarus are not going to be capable of doing much. They are certainly not going to be the same quality as the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And so I think that they will get the same response that the Russians had, that many of them will be killed very quickly.
So I would say that this was very clear answer to my question. So this is basically the same point that our authorities, our leadership, the same stand occupies our leadership. For example, just today's in his address, our President Volodymyr Zelensky, he addressed to Russian military, to Russian citizens, and Zelensky said that, well, let's listen to him together, what he said.
Наші Збройні сили продовжують
Our armed forces continue to deter the enemy in all major directions, inflicting unprecedented losses on Russian forces. Certain occupant units are 80–90% destroyed. In places of particularly brutal fighting, our first line of defense is simply littered with the corpses of Russian soldiers. And no one takes away this corpse. They are used to send new units to the offensive, reserves that the Russian command is gathering wherever it can. We understand that Russia has a bottomless supply of human resources and quite a lot of equipment, missiles and air bombs. But I want to ask the citizens of Russia, what has been done to you over these years that you have stopped noticing the losses? That the words son, mother, father no longer means anything to you. Already more than 14,000 of your soldiers have been killed. That's 14,000 of mothers and fathers, wives, children and relatives and friends. Why don't you notice that? And there will only be more victims as long as this war continues. There is you against us. There is the war of Russia against Ukraine on our land. So we've just heard what Volodymyr Zelensky said to Russian mothers and relatives of Russian soldiers. So the very same thing could be said also to Belarusian soldiers. And we know that Ukrainian army is doing quite good right now. A few days ago, you released your own assessment, which was called 10 Steps to Victory for Ukraine. You pointed out, among other things, that the path to victory includes both economic transformations and swift victories on the battlefield. So, in your opinion, how Ukrainian leadership is doing?
The Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian military are doing outstanding things at the moment. But you have to remember that even if you add all the military, 1 million maybe, and all the leadership together, that still only makes up 5% of Ukrainian population. The other 95% are all the people that plough the fields, do the harvest, sell everything, do the import, do the export, keep the power going, keep the electricity going, keep the heating going, run the railways. And so my point that I was trying to make is that the government needs to focus a little bit more on the 95%, because if that 95% fails, then the government and the military will fail equally.
So that was again very clear and very very accurate answer. Thank you very much for being with us here. This was Glenn Grant, Defense and Security Expert of Ukrainian Institute for the Future. And continuing the topic we've just discussed with our guest about what should the country do in the condition of war, we prepared you a story about new business approaches and new economic changes that just been imposed in Ukraine due to the war. So let's see the story. Over 3 million Ukrainians moved abroad and more than 6 million left for the western regions of Ukraine. This is just an approximate number of refugees. Assisting them is a top priority. So the president of Ukraine instructed the government to develop a program to support IDPs.
Перший компонент.
The first component is financial. Government support for all displaced people, adults and children. The state provision for employment wherever they are staying temporarily, so that every family has a basis for living. The second component is about housing. The government is preparing specific proposals to provide housing for displaced people right now, as well as to organize the reconstruction of destroyed housing once the war is over.
The loss of jobs is one of the main challenges resulting from the current situation. A one-time payment program in the amount of 6,500 hryvnias is now in effect, especially for people turned jobless. However, despite the complicated circumstances, there will be no humanitarian catastrophe for the whole country, the president's office informs.
We have enough reserves of wheat, corn, sunflower oil, base products in warehouses and grain elevators for 3 and 5 years, because we always exported from 70 to 80% of these products, so we are sure to sustain ourselves.
Also, the government is aware that victory in the war is impossible without a strong economic base. That is why an unprecedented package of measures to support businesses was adopted. The fuel tax is reduced. Inspections has been cancelled. Cheap loans are provided at zero interest rate, and all imports are facilitated as much as possible. However, the key thing is that taxes have been cut revolutionarily.
First of all, we are talking about the actual implementation of the simplified system for a large number of companies whose turnover is up to 10 billion hryvnias. This is a very strong support for business, taking into account all current circumstances. Besides, it is a simplified system under which 2% of turnover is to be paid. No longer value-added tax or other types of taxes to be paid. We are in fact moving to a real, I would say, large-scale liberalization.
The costs of the economic policy will be compensated with the foreign partners' assistance. According to statements of representatives of the National Bank, thanks to the unprecedented help, now the state reserves exceed the pre-war level. Reported by Danilo Kobza from Kiev, specially for UA English. And now we are going to be joined here with our new guest. And just to introduce our guest a little bit more, first of all, this is Tatiana Popova. She's an expert with the Stratcom NGO. She's a member of the Council on Freedom of Speech under the auspices of President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And basically, this is the person who is in charge of the freedom of speech in Ukraine, thanks to whom journalists in Ukraine can freely say out loud and freely speak what they need and what they want. So, my greetings to you, Ms. Tatiana.
Hi, nice to meet you and your viewers.
My point now is, I think this is going to be quite interesting discussion. We all know right now that Russian propaganda, Russian machine sees kilometers of different fakes and propaganda and materials that obviously are not true, and we stand to disarm this machine every day. At the same time, and I think this is probably interesting topic for our audience, Some may think that what Ukrainian journalists are doing now can be called also propaganda. Here is one moment, because all Ukrainian channels now are united. We see practically single broadcast all over Ukraine by all news outlets. And my question for you after all this said is just this. How can Ukrainian journalists in this condition of war take an objective position?
I think the best counter propaganda is to say truth. And that's what Russian army and Russian generals, they don't ask to say truth. That's why they killed during last several weeks at least 3 journalists, what I know. Some journalists are missing, some journalists were injured. So Ukrainian journalists should just work, should just do what they can do. I know that some were in prisons of occupied administrations. Some were already free from these prisons. Some are in hospitals. And we should do our work properly, that's all. There is no special government required unless all journalists, including foreign journalists, they should have this frontline accreditation, which is now given in 2 days. I recently helped to some German journalists to receive it, and they really give it in 2 days. But journalists should be very careful, because in a place where Russians army is shelling, they do very heavily shelling, and they even kill especially journalists, as we know from journalists of the time who was killed in a head. So it was a sniper who really target a journalist and were able to kill him.
It's a terrible truth about this war, that Russian soldiers, they are targeting journalists, from Western journalists and Ukrainian journalists. At the same time, they are targeting the truth with their own news and with their own propaganda. And I propose you to look at our material that is dedicated right now to this topic, together with our audience.
Okay.
The head of the Chechen Republic, pro-Putin Ramzan Kadyrov, called out to knock down the main Ukrainian Nazi. Kadyrov promised to pay the bounty to the one who brings him the head of Stepan Bandera. The leader of Chechnya also promised that his soldiers would soon find and kill Bandera themselves. There's only one problem. Bandera was killed in October 1959 by the Soviet KGB agent. Stepan Bandera is one of the main figures of Ukrainian resistance to the Soviets. He legally recognized by the Ukrainian parliament as the fighter for independence of Ukraine. So it is not surprising that Russian propaganda widely uses the personality of Bandera. They just still do not study history lessons. So-called denazification, as Putin says, was one of the reasons why Russia started the war against Ukraine. But now they know more so-called nationalists, not only Bandera. Breaking news, urgent and awful news. Former leader of the right sector Yarosh was appointed the advisor to Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of armed forces of Ukraine. This is the Kremlin propagandist Skabeyeva. She talks about another fear of Russian invaders, Dmitro Yarosh. Yarosh is the follower of Stepan Bandera and the founder of the right sector movement. He was the head of the movement in 2014-2015 when the first invasion in Ukraine happened. Afterwards, he became the commander of the Ukrainian volunteer army. Russian propaganda instantly started to demonize him and create dozens of false stories, such as business card of Yarosh. It is one of the most famous fakes that appeared on Russian TV. The news about the shooting in Donetsk region were accompanied by the note that the business card of Dmitro Yarosh was found there as proof of right sector involvement. Since then, it became the Ukrainian symbol of involvement of armed forces, special services, organizations of Ukraine in specific events. Russians even scared the kids in kindergartens with Yarosh, and poorly educated Kadyrov started hunting him also, via social media, of course. He has to formally apologize and to surrender to justice, otherwise we find him where he is. We need him now alive, we don't care about him when he's dead. Another symbol of resistance and great fear for Russian occupiers. Russian propaganda calls the Azov unit fighters and other neo-Nazis in Ukraine. This unit has been severely fighting against Russian occupation since 2014, when together with the armed forces of Ukraine they recaptured the maritime city of Mariupol from Russians. Today, during the Russian invasion, they are also fighting for the city on the coast of the Sea of Azov. Currently, the city is surrounded by Russian army that continue to shell and bomb the residential districts. Thousands of civilians are killed by Russian bombs and rockets as revenge for not being able to confront Ukrainian army. In the beginning of March, the Russian soldiers bombed the maternity hospital in Mariupol. The images of the wounded women being carried out from the destroyed building have spread around the world. But in Russia, they say that hit the hospital because allegedly Azov fighters were there. In this maternity hospital, we said this at the Security Council on March 7. There are no women, no children, no staff. It was occupied by the Azov battalion fighters together with other radicals who set up a stronghold there. But Russia is not just afraid of what they call Ukrainian nationalists. Russians are afraid of even ordinary Ukrainians. For example, back in 2017, the Russian media Echo of Moscow launched a poll. The question was, what nationality are you afraid to meet in the dark? And every other person wrote Ukrainians.
So now we are back to studio together with our guest. This is Tatiana Popova, an expert on the freedom of speech and member of the Council of Freedom of Speech. We've just seen our story about how some Russian leaders are trying to
demonize Ukrainian national movements.
Yeah,
I think it's their standard narrative which they constantly use in their propaganda. I think it was even done before 2014. But with start after Maidan and Revolution of Dignity, they started to use it constantly, like regularly. Even when Yarosh was he stopped to be a member of parliament. As you know, we do not have now in a parliament any nationalistic or close to nationalistic party. So there is only centrist or even pro-Russian party like Oppositionный Blok za Życia, but still they are trying to demonizing Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian territorial battalions. And I think it's just total lie what they're saying about this hospital woman who was pregnant, who actually died after this shelling, which you show on your photo, which all world saw. So that's their standard lie, like they have several versions of one episode, like the same they had about MH17. If you remember, they immediately started to put into information sphere 6-7 different versions, like it was a dead bodies, it was a special prepared, it was a Ukrainian then Ukrainians shelled, then it was Ukrainian fighter jet. So that's a standard approach when they made a mistake and they tried to dissolve through with all these fiction stories.
Yeah, and now on screen we've just seen some of those authors of these fakes. They were well-known presenters. Dmitry Kiselyov, one of the, this is the TV presenter that is
Andreeva.
And all these people.
But you know that all there are under sanctions now. But TV channels are not under sanctions. So government Russian TV channel who are calling to kill Ukrainians They even calling to invade Europe, not only Ukrainians, but now they're calling to invade Europe and bomb Poland, bomb other countries. As you remember, their ultimatum was in December, actually, to denatofication of Europe till the level of 1997. So they actually won't come back and receive a control under all Eastern Europe, which they had before 1997. And these channels are still not under sanction, which is really very strange from my point of view.
Indeed, it's quite a brazen claim. I'm not sure whether you've heard me right now. Another question is how some Western, I would say, Muppets, yeah, by Russian propaganda, like Graham Phillips, how they could somehow operate in Ukraine. If you remember, there was a video when Graham Phillips showing himself somewhere on the border of Ukraine and talking about three sisters. Allegedly, he talked that there are three sisters, and he was telling about that supposedly one of them is just mad sister. Was it? I'm not sure. Maybe you know this story better than me. Was he really in Ukraine at that moment, or this was just a show?
You mean Graham Phillips recently, during last several? Yeah, he was with the Russian army, as far I understand. I think he was with the Russian army attending Ukraine. No, Ukrainian occupied territories. That's what I understood.
This is the point, yeah. So one of the Western journalists is moving across Ukrainian territory that is now under the occupation of Russian forces, and nothing can be done to this, yeah. So I just want to, before we go to our next stories with our audience, I want to say thank you, Ms. Tatiana, for being with us here in our studio. And I just want to say, with the words of our President Volodymyr Zelensky. Once he said in one of his address, he said that all those people that committed atrocities on the territory of Ukraine will be brought to justice. He even said it in a little bit more, in a more harsh way. He said that we will find all those who particularly those who gave orders. And this was about also the members of Kadyrov's team, to them also. So now we are approaching to our next topic, and while we are waiting for our next guest, I propose you to see very interesting material, because unprecedented level of pressure was brought against Russia by the Western community. But at the same time, Russia has some alternatives to find, and this is a story about the organization called BRIC. It's an alliance of China, India, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil. And this organization could potentially give Russia some way out of this situation. So how this could be, we will show you in our story right now.
Slowly but being cut from the traditional connections, Russia has turned its efforts towards alternative relations and has remembered about the old project BRICS, the economic union between Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. The one who noticed unusual activity is Carl Miller, author of a book about power in the digital age. Very clear it is targeting BRICS, Africa, Asia, said Miller in Twitter, and mentioned about the huge amount of sleeping accounts that were activated after after the 2nd of March. So let's dive into and try to understand what they want and why BRICS is important on the background of sanctions provided against Russia. The term BRICS was invented by Goldman Sachs analysts in the report dated 2001. It was used for the prospective countries that would possibly create the Union alternative to the EU. In 2006, in Russia, the first meeting of the economy ministers was held and the work began. Before the war, the intention to enter the global economy was considered the main goal. The BRICS was supposed to reach full capacity by 2050. China and India were to become the main global suppliers of manufactured goods, while Brazil and Russia would become dominant as suppliers of raw materials. But still, the export relation with the non-BRICS countries were bigger than internal ones. Moreover, the development was slowed down by the COVID pandemic. Another important way of economic development was the establishment of the BRICS Continent Reserve Arrangement, or in other words, creation of their own international monetary fund with their own financial system similar to SWIFT, available for all the 5 countries. The BRICS Development Bank started its activity in 2017. The biggest contribution was made by Moscow. The regional departments were opened in South Africa, Brazil, Russia and India. Headquarters in China. And this financial system could probably have become the safe harbor for the Kremlin. But on the 4th March of 2022, the bank suspended the new transactions in Russia. Almost the same time when the weird accounts in social media started massively popularizing Russia and its war against Ukraine. Obviously, nowadays inside BRICS the countries are deciding the perspectives of the unity itself and the participation of Russia. As soon as it became toxic and cut from the traditional export market, Moscow is obviously taking the partners down with it. But on the other hand, South Africa stays silent after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. India is behaving like nothing happened, balancing between two sides. China, with all the Asian diplomacy, is demanding peace for Ukraine without obviously condemning Russia. Brazil reacted with the foreign minister's statement, Brazil won't take sides over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, trying to leave the path to keep good relations with Kremlin. So for now, the unity of BRICS is in uncertainty. China, with its deep economic ties in Africa, Latin America and the EU, is playing safe, not revealing plans, but obviously staying apart from direct support of Putin. Brazil, with the economy devastated by coronavirus, is getting prepared for presidential and general elections this year. And with the majority of people not supporting the Russian war in Ukraine, the authorities are obviously losing their positions. India, with long-term connections with Russia, doesn't want to break it, but risks to lose other export markets as Putin's supporter. South Africa also cannot stay apart for a long time. All BRICS countries are under threat of reputational damage. On the other hand, can they go on without Russia's toxic partnership? Well, India has the potential of the biggest growth among others during the next 50 years, mainly due to the reduction of the working age in India and Brazil, which will happen later than in Russia and China. So these are younger generation in BRICS countries who are going to make a decision about their future.
What right now happens in the international sphere and in politics international, we see that right now China, this is quite obvious bargaining process between the United States and China. After the Russia appealed to China for some aid in its to waging war against Ukraine, the China took some neutral position and awaiting position. So this is exactly the topic we are gonna discuss with our next guest. But let's at first see what Bankova thinks on this point about China. China can be the global security system's important element if it makes a right decision to support the civilized countries' coalition and condemns Russia's barbarism. It is a chance to sit at the table as equals. The West must explain to Beijing how $1.6 trillion differs from $150 billion. And we welcome here our next guest. This is Alexander Hara. He's a diplomat, a fellow of the Center of Defense Strategies. Greetings, Mr. Alexander.
Good evening.
Good evening. So the question for you is, in In the flow what we have just discussed, our topic is now U.S.-China relations in the context of the war in Ukraine, and basically we see that China now has taken a wait-and-see attitude, expecting some proposals. Probably they can be offered from U.S. and from Russia. And so if this assumption is correct, so what China's neutrality to the war in Ukraine would cost for the United States, for Ukraine, and what Russia can offer on its part?
Well, first of all, China is trying to balance its relations between the United States and Russia. Certainly, if you're talking about the economic dimension, you cannot compare $650 billion of the trade turnover with the United States and just $150 billion with Russia. It's not the scale is not comparable. But from the other hand, Russia is trying to use China as a leverage against the West, and China is trying to balance the West with Russia and to secure access to the commodities and some other things that China needs, like the military technology and other things. So that's why the Chinese are trying to forge this the equilibrium between the West and Russia. Certainly, they are not happy with what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And recently, the Chinese diplomats said that they are disappointed that there are some rumors that Beijing knew in advance that Russia is going to invade Ukraine, and it was a pretty much a strong position of China to support territorial integrity and sovereignty of other countries, including Ukraine, as the Chinese diplomat said. So China is trying to balance. And there is no reason for them to give up on Russia, because in this case they would pave the way for the West to reduce the power or to diminish the power of Russia, which China is not going to allow. From the other hand, they are not going to support them to such an extent that the West need to apply some harsh sanctions with regard to China. So they are trying to be cautious. They are proposing let's say diplomatic efforts to solve Ukrainian-Russian disputes and to stop this bloody war. But from the other hand, they are not going to drastically change their attitude. And I should mention the other thing, that in 2018, China has changed its constitution, and with Xi Jinping in power almost till the death, he is capable of changing the course from waiting and seeing what's happening in the world stage to changing the world stage and to changing the global economic and other architecture. Russia, in its turn, changed constitution in 2020, and Putin can hold this post as a president for some more years to come until his death. And he has the window of opportunity to reestablish Russia as a global power. That's why we see this war, and I would say a senseless war, and the war of choice, as the Americans are saying, in Ukraine. Chinese wants to change a bit of the economic and political system of the world, but Russia wants to redraw it completely, because it's not happy with the security system that was established after the Second World War and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's why their approaches differ from each other. But from the other hand, it's to some extent their position and their interests are in harmony with regard to the West. If you have a look at the joint statement of Xi Jinping and Putin during the Olympic Games, they were saying that there are other global powers, not just the United States, who should be taken into account. They are against groups of countries who are trying to limit ability of other countries, meaning Russia and in China, to play a global role. So they view the world almost complete in the same way. But China is powerful, and on the rise, and Russia is declining. That's why they approach to the world differently. And possibly the last point, that Russia is a former empire, Russian Empire and then Soviet Empire, and they are trying to build a new one. and China used to be in power. There is a, let's say, thinking of this way, that they need to have weak neighbors that they can influence, and that's why China is not happy with the approach of the United States to collect and to gather all those small states in the South China Sea and to have this quadruple union of India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. So they're not happy with this kind of unions that are limiting growing assertiveness of those countries. And certainly Russia is not happy with NATO and the presence of the United States on the European continent, because it's limiting its ability to restore it as a global power and influence other countries on the continent.
Yeah, that's nice topic. And you've just mentioned that Russia is a post-imperialistic state trying to regain territories it's supposedly lost after the big break of the Soviet Union. But it's just clear right now they have not enough resources, and yet another proof of it is a proposition to China. So isn't it a situation when the security architecture that used to be present since the World War II is changing, and who will be its next compositors, and should this architecture be based on the security guarantees to Ukraine, and will maybe what's the Ukrainian scenario of this post-war new structure?
Well, I am in the camp of those who believe that the current security architecture is pretty well established, and we need just to reinforce it. And what I'm saying, it's not about the United Nations and the Security Council, because certainly it needs to be reorganized and reformed. But I believe that people were talking about reforming the United Nations since 1960s, and we still have the same system. But I'm talking predominantly about transatlantic security architecture that preserved peace since 1945. And I see that the only way how to have Europe whole, free, and at peace is just to expand its sphere of political, economic, and defense structures to Ukraine, to Georgia, and in future to Belarus. So the only way how to, let's say, stop revisionist powers like Russia is to withstand this pressure and to unite on the values that those organizations like NATO and European Union were based. And certainly the cornerstone of our security architecture in Europe is OSCE Final Act of 1975. There are some, let's say, adjustments that might be added to this document, but in principle, these documents are still relevant. The only thing that is not relevant is the Russian attitude that the might is right. So they want to use force against our neighboring countries. They want to ignore some basic elements and the principles of international law because they are not happy with them. But from the other hand, they are just cherry picking other things that they are happy with. Like they are demanding security guarantees for them, which is ridiculous. Russia is the biggest nuclear state in the world. They have the biggest military power in European continent. At least they were thinking that they had this. Ukrainian army shows that there is, let's say, Potemkin village rather than the powerful European army that the Russian possess. So we need to push Russia back. We need to make Russia obey international law, the principles and the spirit of international law, beginning from the UN Charter, OSCE Final Acts, and the number of other international multilateral documents. and then bilateral documents, because, for example, Russia violated not just so-called Budapest Memorandum, but the so-called Great Agreement between Ukraine and Russia, where they recognized our borders, including Donetsk, Lugansk, the Crimean Peninsula, including Sebastopol, but then they violated it. So we need to push Russia back and to make them, let's say, live up to the commitment Russia has been making since 1945, when this international system has been organized and then advanced. So we need more freedom. We need more values. We need more democracy on our continent, and that's why NATO is the cornerstone of this security architecture. And we're not going to change it. We need to pave the way for Ukraine to this organization, rather than to, let's say, step back on the Russian demands, or I would say Russian blackmail of the West and Russian killing of Ukrainians, because they want, by killing Ukrainians, change the security architecture in Europe. So we should not allow them, because otherwise other revisionist powers would do the same in different regions of the globe, and we would be in dire straits.
One more question for you. I just personally want to ask you that the thing is that today we now in constant flow and constant change of news. Every day something is happening, and particularly Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, stated that he hopes for the pleasurable outcome of the negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian sides, which is a huge difference in the rhetoric from what Russian side has stated before. But at the same time, he added that this assumable peace deal should include a number of changes to Ukrainian constitution and laws, which is, I'm absolutely sure, is definitely not the Ukrainian case. And our negotiator Mikhailo Podolyak multiply said in answered to this that this is not the point of the bargaining with Ukraine. At the same time, again, coming back to the previous question of the result of this, maybe of how the security structure will be present after the possible peace deal. What makes us secure of that Russia won't make this offense again? This is just the basic question. And what should be the guarantee or guarantor? Who can be a guarantor? U.S., China?
Well, there is no possibility to make any guarantees, security guarantees from the nuclear states. The other countries, those who were on threshold of the acquiring nuclear arms, they offer different variants. But since Russia violated Budapest Memorandum, I believe that other countries like Iran, Northern Korea, and some others would be not willing to give up on their nuclear and rocket programs. So I do not believe in any type of international law guarantees or the, let's say, arrangements between the big powers that can guarantee security of a non-nuclear state. It's not possible at all. The only way how we can feel secure is to become member of NATO. The second option is to be an ally of the United States, and like Taiwan, for example, when there is a legally binding, let's say, treaty for the United States to protect with all its might, including nuclear option, of its ally that is in need, like Ukraine now. The third option is a powerful military. But it's not really an option for Ukraine, given the asymmetry of economy between Ukraine and Russia, and given the size of the territory and size of the population. 140 million of Russians, it's pretty strong force. They can generate pretty strong force against Ukraine. And some 35-40 million of Ukrainians, it's not enough to let's say, to be capable of defending the country in the future. So now Russia was not prepared. They were mistaken about ability of Ukraine to defend itself, about the nature of Ukrainian, let's say, government, because they were thinking that this government is not welcomed by Ukrainians, and should Russian invaders cross the border, Ukrainians would welcome them as their liberators. So certainly it was not the case. And now in your footage, you are showing how Ukrainians are welcoming the Russian invaders. So I believe there is no possibility to get guarantees from anyone if you are neighboring such an aggressive revisionist power that wants to see Ukraine not as an independent country or neutral country, but as the part of its sphere of influence. That's why I'm strongly against any proposals of any kind of legal arrangements between big powers, because we've already seen it in the Budapest Memorandum. It didn't work. I don't want Ukraine to repeat its bitter lesson. The only way how to guarantee is through the strengths and with cooperation with NATO, membership with NATO. And certainly I don't want to see any changes to my constitution, because my constitution of my country and my countrymen, it's up to us to decide what should we change in it. Not Putin sitting in a bunker, not anyone else in this world, but the Ukrainian people, because otherwise we are just undermining the whole idea of sovereignty and independence and the will of people and democracy. And since Ukrainians for several times on Maidan showed that they want to live in democratic state where people are in the center of the system, when people are deciding the future of the country. So it's not the case that someone, the war criminal in Russia, is imposing us will. So that's why I do not believe in any productive talks with Russians. And that's why I believe the main or the major diplomat at the moment in Ukraine is not president of Ukraine, neither the foreign minister. It's the supreme commander of Ukrainian armed forces. He is creating the right ground for the future talks with Russia. At the moment, Russians are thinking that they can break our will to resist, and they kill a lot of Ukrainians, and Ukrainian government would give up on the Russian demands. So we have not been beaten in the field. That's why there is no reason for us to accept capitulation.
Indeed. So the battlefield is the best diplomat in this situation, unfortunately. So just a brief last question. Should we expect Biden's visit to Kyiv once?
Well, I hope so. I hope that we will win this war, because it's a just war for Ukraine. We are defending our freedom and independence from the colonial power who wants to subjugate us. And certainly in some distant future, there is a possibility for Mr. Biden to visit Kyiv. I hope this conflict will end in a month or in a couple of months, because of the sanction pressure and because of the success of Ukrainian armed forces, territorial defense, and the whole Ukrainian society who is defending our freedom. Certainly we need to prepare for the prolonged war, but I'm an optimist, and I believe that there is a possibility for Ukraine to win this war. And actually, a recent opinion poll showed that almost 90% of Ukrainians believe in the victory. So I hope they have something in mind. They are dedicated their efforts for this, and our efforts will bring the fruit.
So thank you for your commentary and your opinion. That was Alexander Hara, Ukrainian diplomat and fellow the Center of Defense Strategies and expert. And now we are coming to the official positions. Let's see what new updates from Bankova presented by advisor to the head of the Office of the President, Oleksiy Arestovich.
Шановні друзі,
Dear friends, good afternoon. The 25th day of the active phase of the Russian-Ukrainian war. What characterizes the situation? The front line is practically frozen. Tactical actions are taking place because both our and Russian sides do not have enough forces to really turn the situation in one or another direction. The sides are conducting tactical actions, concentrating reserves, striking at each other. But we are doing the strikes better. There are practically no missile strikes on cities, if you notice. Practically, there are no Russian aviation actions. The air forces, even considering the report, they only destroyed 3 helicopters. They would like more. Understand them as well. Again, it should be understood that the Russian leadership has most likely chosen the path of trying to push us by force and increase the martyrology of their killed servicemen. The president compared their number with the field sports stadium by another 10-20,000 people. They are forming reserves, throwing them here, but there is an embarrassing surprise with them. Now in this phase, when the Russian command has failed to accomplish the task, a phase of reprisal has begun. There are numerous reports from our security service and general staff that Russia's Federal Security Service has begun to look for the responsible persons in the armed forces of the Russian Federation and other formations, including Russian Guard. Hundreds and dozens of servicemen are subjected to humiliating inspections. They are accused of refusing to fight, of weakness of character and cowardice. And even generals and senior officers of the armed forces of the Russian Federation come under attack. Thus, one of the representatives of the Information and Psychological Service of the Russian Federation was accused of badly arranging the Kherson People's Republic. Given the number of high command representatives who have been destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces and other defense forces, and pressure from the Federal Security Service, I think that the morale of the Russian army, already extremely low, will be even lower. And no matter how much their political commanders threw them, new forces are limited, by the way, have not been thrown back in some parts of the Russian-Ukrainian front, and these attempts will fail. We have to understand this very clearly. I thank you for attention, watch for the next reports, have a good day.
гарного вам дня.
So you've just heard the updates from Ukrainian soil, what is happening on the battlefield right now, and indeed the losses of Russian army are colossal. Just at the start of our today's stream, you've seen that already more than 14,700 people. For example, this is almost the same number, just a few thousands less than Russia lost during the war in Afghanistan. And it's almost twice more than it lost in Chechen war. And of course, Russian army feels its own senselessness in this war, in ongoing hostilities in Ukraine. That's why they are trying to kill more and more civilian people instead. And in our next footage, you'll see what is happening right now in the eastern Ukrainian cities. Kramatorsk, my colleague, knows more.
My temple is sewn up, my nose is sewn up, my eyebrow is cut above this eye.
Kramatorsk resident Nina Petrivna received sharp nail wounds as a result of the attack on the city. The woman suffered for the second time from the shelling of the occupiers. 2 weeks ago, a fragment of the downed rocket damaged her home.
The vestibule door, along with the closed lock, was blown out. The double front door was split in half. We asked if we could stay with our relatives. There is a vacant apartment above them. People left it earlier, so we settled in their home.
As a result of yesterday's explosions, more than 40 houses in Kramatorsk were left without windows and balconies. All the victims who are now being treated in the city hospital were at home at the time of explosion. Vitaly has injuries to his eyes and hand. Neighbors helped him to get out of the room.
First explosion, the windows fell down. I'm on the first floor and from the upper floors. The second explosion followed immediately. I was knocked over. Then I got up, couldn't see anything. Got out to the entrance by feel. Then people helped.
Kramatorsk resident Igor, who like many of his neighbors was at home at the time of the explosion, did not immediately understand whether he was injured or not. He says that he didn't think about pain, but there was only one thought in his head: how to get out.
I didn't know. I was in shock. My heel was broken. Nevertheless, I could walk. I didn't notice it. I didn't pay attention to anything. My left leg is stitched up. Here it is sewn up. There is a broken leg, but we don't pay attention to scratches.
Here in the hospital, people don't talk about their wounds and pain, but they worry about destroyed houses. They say the worst thing is to lose a home.
It is hard to describe. Everything was torn from the blast waves. Duct tape, windows and plastic, everything was destroyed. Frames, window sills, iron doors, wooden doors, everything cracked. Well, the blast wave was a big one.
All victims are under round-the-clock medical supervision, and despite all the pain and fears, they believe in a prompt victory and peace in Ukraine.
We believe in victory. We are a strong nation. Everything will be fine. We will still do sports.
Reported by Olena Shustova and Olena Gramova, UATV News.
7 more humanitarian corridors have been agreed on the 25th day of war in Ukraine. This was stated by Ukrainian Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, Ірина Верещук. Let's listen to her.
Доброго ранку, шановні українці. Сьогодні 20 березня 2022 року, 9 година ранку.
Good morning, dear Ukrainians. Today, March 20th, 2022, 9 a.m., and we are opening more humanitarian corridors. To date, 7 humanitarian corridors have been agreed upon. Donetsk region, from Mariupol to Zaporizhia. Buses for Mariupol residents will be waiting in the square in front of the city sports complex in Berdansk from 9:30. Departure to Zaporizhia is planned at 11 o'clock. Private cars of Mariupol residents moving on the route to Zaporizhia continue to be refueled in Berdansk. Addresses for refueling: 132A Kabelshikov Street and Melitopol Highway 87B.
Також організовано транспортування до Бердянську і Запоріжжя для маріупольців, які дістануться до Мангуша.
Our next story I want to present for you is dedicated to the humanitarian efforts made in eastern Ukraine in the city of Severodonetsk by Ukrainian National Police. In addition to their usual duties, they take many different tasks and watch details in my colleague's story.
The 25th day of the war changed the lives of thousands of Ukrainians. Today, all services work in the realities of warfare. There are more tasks for the police in the city of Severodonetsk in the Luhansk region. Now they help deliver targeted humanitarian aid to shelters.
There are no words. I now stutter because of everything that's happening in Ukraine.
As it turned out, we are too old to walk. Did you get transferred? Yes.
They take food and hygiene products from the humanitarian headquarters. Because there is no gas and electricity in the entire area of Severodonetsk, people have to cook on fires near the entrance. Therefore, now the humanitarian aid mostly consists of canned food, packaged soups, noodles, and everything that can be easily cooked near the entrance using a small fire.
How long have you been cooking like this?
For 2 weeks, and no one knows how long it will last.
More than 100 houses have been destroyed in Severodonetsk. Therefore, police officers help to move people to relatives and friends in those houses that have survived. More than half of the population of Severodonetsk refuses to evacuate from the city.
How many of you are left? Are there a lot of you? 5 people at the entrance. Here, 5 people are here. We have nowhere to go. Tell us about your conditions. We don't have anything, no gas, there is no light, water. Is there a place for you to hide? I'm hiding in the storage room. You have no idea what are the conditions. Here are my hands. I come here quickly. I have 2 cats. I feed them and run back. Unbearable. Fourth floor, already tired from every rustle. We don't understand who shoots and how, whether it's coming from us or towards us. We hide from every rustle.
There are corpses in the streets. There is no one to take them away due to constant hostilities. Houses are burning. Ukrainian police officers admit there is no time for sleep now.
We deliver food, hygiene products and some basic necessities to people in dangerous areas where volunteers do not go. We try to keep in touch with people to write down what they need.
I saw that you are transporting people to other areas where there is electricity and heating.
Yes, sometimes people come up and ask for your help to move them to other areas, especially if they have somewhere to go.
Police work around the clock trying to help the residents of the city and ensure order in Severodonetsk. Reported by Marina Stepanenko, Anastasia Volkova, UATV News.
You've just seen the story from one of the cities in Donetsk region of Ukraine, one of the hotspots of current war. And now I want to propose to see you the recent video that was made public by Guardian. What you just see right now on your screen, this is the air footage of the city of Mariupol. This is another city of the Donetsk region. In 25 days, Russian forces, by its shelling and constant air bombing, almost destroyed all the city. Today, authorities of the Donetsk region stated that more than 100 persons died due to the shelling, but at the same time they said that this number does not include the casualties affected as a result of the shelling of Mariupol. And we know that only in this city there was at least 2,000 or over 2,000 killed civilians. So, and now I want to say thank you for being with us for the last hour, and this is all for us. Thank you again. Thank you, and comment us, share us. Your support is essential. See you tomorrow.